to your local church should be easy, and with Tidely, it is. Just download the app and securely register your credit or debit card. You're done. Now you can give during church services or anywhere else. Use Tidely to give a one-time gift or set up recurring donations. It's that simple. It's fast, secure, and easy to use. Tidely, the simplest way to give to your local church.
Good morning, church. Good morning, Newsoul. Let's stand up and worship together. But it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Came along. Then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied right here in your love. There's nothing, oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. Found is true. I'm not afraid. Now I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. And there's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. And no, there's nothing better Yeah, yeah. Morning to dancing. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. And you're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. Graves into gardens. You turn graves into gardens. It's what you do. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing that is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Graves in the gardens. You turn graves into gardens. That's what you do. You turn bones into armies. Every time you turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. And you turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. And you're the only one who can. You're the only one. You're the only one who can. You're the only one. You're the only one who can. Yeah.
Together, we are creating a new future for the Valley because of your generosity. Your financial support is being used to produce content and create a loving community that is bringing hope to hurting people during the COVID pandemic and quarantine. Your giving equips Newsoul Ribera with tools to provide access to our services and support for people who can only meet with us by phone. Because you give, the hungry are being fed, and we've launched a winter warmth campaign to protect people in the Valley from the cold this season. With your help, in 2021, we're not slowing down, but ramping up a campaign to expand our digital reach to help and inspire more kids, students, singles, families, and seniors. Your giving is making a difference in the community. 1 Timothy 6:17-19 says, "Don't be full of yourselves and obsessed with money, which is here today and gone tomorrow. Go after God, who piles on all the riches we could ever manage. Do good. Be rich in helping others. Be extravagantly generous. If you do that, you'll build a treasury that will last, gaining life that is truly life." We have quick and easy ways for you to give. Online, newsoulribera.com. By text BLESS to 94000. By app, download the Tithely app. Or by mail, Newsoul Ribera, P.O. Box 574, Ribera, New Mexico 87560. To receive text updates from Newsoul Ribera, text Ribera to 94000.
Well, hi, I'm so glad that you're joining us today. My name is Steve, and I'm the lead pastor here at Newsoul Ribera. If this is the first time you're joining us, I just want to welcome you and tell you that I'm so glad that you're joining us today. Thank you. I hope it's not the last time you're joining with us today. You know, something that probably we all have in common is that we all love a good story. But did you know that you are creating a story? That's right, you're a director, you're an author of a story. In our story that we have, sometimes we might ask our parents or our grandparents, we ask them, tell us, grandma or grandpa, tell us about your story. Tell us. You might ask your parents, what was it like? What did you get in trouble for? Those type of things. We ask them to reach back into a chapter of the story of their lives. And you do the same thing, and I do the same thing when somebody asks us about how we met or how we ended up in the place that we are right now in our lives. We open up a chapter of our story. These stories come from moments and chapters of our lives, just like the one you're in right now. And whatever it is you're going through as you are watching and listening to this right now, very soon, this moment will turn into the story of your life that you'll just look back on. We're coming out of the pandemic now, and very soon, the pandemic will just be a story that we tell ourselves about and talk about and look back on. COVID will become that story. Masks will become part of the story. Remote school will become part of that story, just like 9/11 or World War II. But the current events of our lives, those situations that you're in right now, that you find yourself in, the decisions that we're making in the midst of our story, in the midst of our current events, they will also become quickly part of our story. This moment is a chapter in your life, and it's like one scene in the movie of your life. It might feel like it's the whole story, but let me assure you, it's not. If you need proof, remember when you were a child or a teenager, when you first got married or started your first job or had your first kiss, maybe when you learned to drive, those things in that moment, you couldn't wait to do any of those things. And then they came and went. And it seemed like forever before those things happened. Those moments felt like they would last forever, but now you look back and they're just memories, part of your story. Because once you make a decision, it gets reclassified as a story. Your decisions become part of the story you tell, or one that you are embarrassed to tell, or that you hope you never have to tell, or one that's too painful to tell. Most of the time, the biggest factor on which it is the decisions that we make. You are writing the story of your life one decision at a time. And a thoughtful response or an emotionally fueled reaction, either one of those. We write the stories of our lives one decision at a time. More on that in just a little bit. We're in part 2 of the series, Decide Better and Regret Less. And we've been talking about the connection between good questions and good decisions. And often our decisions are no better than the questions we ask or that we don't even think to ask. And this series, I promise, if you engage with the content, if you wrestle with it, think about it, if you ask these questions, if you answer honestly and you act on what you find out, you will make better decisions. I promise you, you'll make better decisions in your life. And if you decide better, you will regret less in your life, which means your life will be better. And the people who look to you and who depend on you, their lives will be better as well. Because you know this, we are not the only people impacted by the decisions that we make. And we're also not the only people impacted by the regrets that we have, are we? I asked you I think it was last week, I asked you to memorize a saying out of the book of Proverbs. And if you haven't memorized it, I encourage you to memorize it. This is the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. If you can commit this to memory, it will help you with that little sales associate who lives in your head and in my head, trying to sell us on the decisions that we will end up regretting later. They want you to act now and to decide fast, to look at the immediate and ignore the ultimate impact of your decisions. These questions that we're going to ask in this series, including the one today, will encourage you to slow down, to pause, and get perspective to see danger coming in your life so that you don't just keep going and damage and destroy your life and have regrets in your life. Every time you decide, you are creating a future and a story. You decide for yourself and for those around you. You're also part of their story. Even if you decide to not decide, it's a decision, and it becomes part of that story and the future that you're creating. And these questions will help you connect the dots between creating a future you prefer or one that you prefer to avoid. Last time, we asked this first question, the integrity question. Am I being honest with myself? Really? I hope you've been incorporating this into your life. I hope that you've been asking this question and answering honestly, that even if it makes you feel bad about yourself, that you have the courage to lean into this question and to the reality that it reveals. Today, we go after the second question. This is what I call the legacy question. It's, what story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell? When this season, this chapter, this relationship, this business decision, this time at school, this part of your career is over, what story do you want to tell about it? When your kids are no longer babies, but they're now in school age, or when they're out of school age and they're teenagers, or when they're out of teenagers and now they're adults, or when you're entering the stage of grandparent life, or maybe you're widowed, or you're in the middle of your life, whatever stage you're at, whatever chapter you're in, what do you want the story to be? Do you want to be the hero, or do you want to be the villain in your story? Do you want to be the good example or the bad example? What option or decision would make this chapter of your life a story that you want to tell later on? Which would make it a chapter you hope no one ever finds out? Here's the good news. You get to decide. You're the author, you're the director, you're the captain. You get to decide one decision at a time, because as far as it is up to you, you write the story of your life one decision at a time. Every decision you make becomes a permanent part of the story of your life. And everything that follows your decision is a consequence or a result or an outcome, either good or bad, beautiful or ugly, expected or unexpected of that decision. Your child leaves home and begins to make decisions you don't agree with, for example. So you decide that you want to lecture them or punish them in some way that you punish a grown child, whether you don't talk to them, or your tone is different, or you yell at them, or you give them, you withhold some type of affection from them, and to let them know that you aren't happy with the decisions that they're making. So you punish them every time you see them or talk to them so that they will do what you want them to do. So they stop talking to you and they move far away from you. And years later, they bring the grandchildren to see you for Christmas, because after all, you are their grandparents. But when they do, the conversations are awkward and filled with pain. Now that could be your story. Or instead of that, you resist the urge to lecture them and let them know how displeased you are with the decisions they're making, and you keep your mouth shut. And you just keep loving them and finding places where there is common ground. You keep creating an atmosphere in your conversations and your visits, even if they're brief, to make them want to keep coming back. And then, one day, a few years later, and several bad decisions later maybe, they tell you how they hope to be a parent just like you. And they tell you this as you're both playing with your grandchildren. Now that's a better story. Or you're overlooked at work. You're maybe even discriminated against, and you're tempted to quit or to become bitter and just to do the bare minimum to keep your job. It's all politics anyway at the office, right? So what's the point? So you keep your head down, and you're the first one out the door when it's time to leave. You put in your time until you retire, and you never scratch the surface of what you were capable of. And when you see that retirement check come in decades from now, something inside you aches because you know that you had more to give. You had more to offer, more inside you, but that opportunity and that time has passed. Now that's one story. Or instead of just doing the minimum, you decide to pursue excellence, regardless of what your boss does or your coworkers do. And you do the job to the best of your ability, whether you get the promotion or raise or not. You come in early, you stay late, and you use all your skills and talents to help your organization succeed. Years later, when you see your retirement check come in, you have a smile in knowing that you didn't allow office politics, immature people, or fear stop you from living the life you wanted to lead. You did your best, and you know that no one can take that away from you. No title and no amount of money can give that to you. That inner satisfaction. Now that's a better story. And like we talked about last time, you are not the only one impacted by your decisions, both your good decisions and your bad ones. People depend on you. They look up to you. They're connected to you in your family, at work, at school, in your faith community, neighbors, friends, even people you don't even know yet are watching you and listening to you, and their story is connected to your story. Your life is a story, but we don't think about it that way, do we? For example, I lost my job during the pandemic. I tried to get unemployment, but that didn't really work out for me. And that's part of my story now. It was current events at the time. I could have racked up a bunch of credit card debt. I could have started drinking too much. I could have gotten angry at my employer, at the government, gotten bitter at life. And it's understandable if that was the decision I made. No one would blame me. That story would have made sense. But what impact would that have had on Renee or my children? What about my parents or my extended family? People on social media, if I decided to vent up all my frustration and my bitterness towards the world, what impact would it have had on you? Is that the story I would have wanted to tell? I'm grateful to say that isn't my story. It was difficult at times. I didn't know how this chapter of my story would play out, but I made different decisions, and things turned out so much better than I could have planned for myself. And now I have a better story to tell. So, in the situation that you are in right now, good or bad, things going your way or against you, the choices you are faced with, don't you want to be the hero in your story? I think we all want that. So today, the question to pause and ask yourself mid-decision when you look back at this chapter in your life is, what story do I want to tell? Which of the available options do I want to be a permanent part of my story? The reason we don't think about our story is that we get distracted by the pressures and the emotions of the moment, right? Emotions are like a fog. Some of you are in the middle of that fog right now. You're in so much pain or confusion. And they're like a fog when you're trying to make a decision. When you're angry or afraid, you're not thinking about the long-term impact of your words, the words you say or how you say them. So you're left thinking about your options instead of your story. Your worst decisions in your life, I'm guessing, were probably fueled by something with strong emotional appeal. Whether it is to end your marriage, to quit your job, to make some other types of decisions that you really regret, that it was something to do with a very strong emotional appeal. If you're in retail sales, and we've all been in a retail store before, you know how this works. You don't let the customer out of the store because the emotion of the moment, if they leave, will pass and then they won't make the sale. It's called focalism. If you've ever been in love, right? You've been sitting at the desk and all you can write is Randy, over and over again, or Jessica over and over again. When you're experiencing focalism, all you can see is that person. If you've been through a divorce, you understand what this is like, or a really bad breakup. You can't think clearly. Everything is a mess, right? You're just focused on the pain, on the emotion of that moment. Your focus and your emotions are fully engaged and you have a difficult time seeing anything else. We've all had this experience because in emotionally charged decision-making environments, we think in terms of our options, not our stories. And if we're honest, there is no such thing as neutral decision-making environments. I mean, we're all under pressure. There's deadlines. We're tired. People are asking us to make decisions. That's just how life goes. So when you're in a situation like this or confronted with something or someone with a very strong emotional appeal, your response should be to hit pause instead of play. Strong emotional appeal should trigger a red flag instead of a green light. Instead of leaning in, you should step back. Not because he's not the right guy, or, he might be, or that it's not the smart investment or business decision. It might be. It's not that you shouldn't have that conversation. Maybe you should. Or that it's not the best life decision to move or make a big change, because it might be. But pause, step back, sleep on it, call a friend, give yourself some time to breathe, get out of the fog, think clearly and consider your story. It puts this chapter and this decision in the big picture of the story of your life. The Old Testament story of Joseph may prove really helpful here. Many of you are so familiar with this story, you could tell it yourselves. So I'll give you the condensed version. About 1800 years before the birth of Christ, a 17-year-old named Joseph, he was the 11th of 12 sons. He finds himself in a no-win situation, in this situation that he had nothing to do with. He was the favorite son of his father, and it fueled jealousy in his older brothers. They hated him. Again, totally not his fault. None of this was his fault. They first decide to kill him and then change their mind because selling him as a slave would, which is to be part of a human trafficking scheme, would give them a chance to make more money and get rid of Joseph at the same time. So they come back and they tell their grief-stricken father that his favorite son was killed by a wild animal. Now these 10 young men have a secret that they have to carry with themselves for the rest of their lives. They have a chapter of their lives that they'll be embarrassed to tell anyone. Their story goes like this. If you think about it, I had a younger teenage brother, and I was so jealous of him that I decided to kill him, but then beat him up. I and my 9 other brothers beat up our baby brother and then sold him to slave traders instead. I then covered it up by lying to my father and breaking his heart. Now that is not a good story. And now these 10 young men have become liars for life. I plead with you, do not become a liar for life. Don't do anything that would make you become a liar for life. Here's why. Whatever you gain in the moment will not be worth what you're forced to carry in the moments that follow. Some of you know this all too well. That's why it's so important to consider your story. Back to Joseph. So he sold into slavery and he's put on the auction block in Egypt and is purchased by a high-ranking Egyptian military officer named Potiphar. Joseph has a decision to make, like all slaves do. Do I do what most people do who become slaves and try to run? Or get bitter and angry and do as little as I can get by with? Or do I throw myself fully into the slave thing and try to do my best for the person and family who purchased me? Tough dilemma for a rich kid who was his father's favorite son. Remember, none of this is his fault. Somebody else took control of his story. His story, like parts of your story, were hijacked. They were commandeered. They were taken over by someone or something else, by selfish people, maybe by evil people. Why try? Why care? That's always the temptation when someone or something hijacks our story. Give up, give in. Well, Joseph decides not to give in and let fate have its way. He chose instead to do what no slave does. He gives himself to his new job. He decides to serve Potiphar's household as if it was his own. He does such a great job that Potiphar trusts him with more responsibility and puts him in charge of his entire household. Now this is a good story, right? But then, as many of you know, the music changes and someone else steps in to hijack Joseph's story. Once again, through no fault of his own, Joseph is put in a no-win situation. Potiphar's wife insists that Joseph become her lover, probably become one of her many lovers. Now, Joseph has 2 options, neither of which are going to result in a good outcome for him. In this culture, it really wasn't a moral issue of an affair or sex because, see, she owned him. It was a boss making a decision over a subservient person. She had all the power. She owned him. He wasn't even just her employee. He was her slave. The value of his life was not very much to her. She was going to get what she wanted from him and then move on. So this decision for Joseph wasn't moral. It was really about life and death. Remember, he's only 19 or 20 years old at this point in his story. Either become Potiphar's wife's lover, which would probably result in his death at some point when Potiphar finds out, or say no to her, which would make Joseph her enemy and would probably end up with him tortured or dead. So then Joseph employs a powerful technique here that I hope you and I can learn from, and you may want to use in your life, in your story. He actually rehearses his story out loud to Mrs. Potiphar. And I've paraphrased what he said. Here's what he said. Mrs. Potiphar, I came to this land as a slave. I had no rights and no future. Your husband purchased me, and I did my best to serve him and you. Through hard work and God's help, I've gained the trust of your husband. He's put me in charge of the entire household. My story, Mrs. Potiphar, Joseph would say, this is, despite how my life began here, it's starting to get better, and it's getting better all the time. He said, With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Mrs. Potiphar, that's your story. It's not my story. Think this through, Mrs. Potiphar. Do you really want to have an affair with a Jewish slave as part of your story? Joseph steps back here, and out loud, he looks at this decision in the big picture of how his story is going, and he asks this question: how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Why would I want to add adultery to what's turning out to be a pretty good story? It's having an ending I never dreamed possible when I arrived here in Egypt. So which of these stories, Mrs. Potiphar, do I or you want to tell? Story 1. Your husband gave me an opportunity I never dreamed would come my way, so I was faithful to him and to God, who's been watching out for me. Or story 2, Mrs. Potiphar. Your husband gave me an opportunity I never dreamed would come my way, so I took advantage of his trust and had an affair with his wife. Which story do I want to tell, Mrs. Potiphar? Which story do you want to tell? When the decision you're right in the middle of making right now is made and it's a story you tell, what story do you want to tell? Joseph made the wise choice and made a good decision, but as life sometimes goes, it didn't go well for him. Potiphar's wife accuses him of rape and has him thrown into prison. But Joseph's story wasn't over, and neither is yours. It's true that when we find ourselves in a long and difficult chapter and season of our story, it can feel like it's our entire story, but it's not. And the difference between a great story and a story filled with regret are usually the decisions that we make during these seasons and chapters of our life. Joseph continued to make good decisions despite someone else hijacking his story. Even when he deserved to be treated better, even when someone else protected themselves and used him to do it. They made their own lives better by making his life worse. Even though it wasn't his fault, he continues to decide well when his circumstances get worse. He decides in prison, like he did in Potiphar's house, to do his best and not be bitter at others, at the world, or at God. Over time, he wins the favor of the prison warden. Now, while none of us are children and our lifelong ambition is to win the favor and friendship of prison wardens, he decides to do what he could with what he had been given. And he ends up in charge of the entire prison. Years go by. And that's important to say. Years go by. This didn't happen quickly. Still choosing well, and one day he finds himself in front of the king of Egypt, being asked to interpret a dream that's of great importance, the king believes, to the nation of Egypt. He tells the king that he can't interpret the dream, and everyone in the room gasps. He looks at the king and says, only God, the Jewish God, can interpret dreams. Which is a bold thing to say to someone who considers himself a god. That day, the king was more curious than furious, so Joseph told him the meaning of the dream. He told him that Egypt was about to experience 7 years of record-breaking grain harvest. And so that you know, in ancient times, the main ingredient for bread was grain. Bread was the main ingredient of the diet for ancient people. And if there were no grain, people would literally starve to death. After 7 years of great harvest, Joseph interpreted the dream, there would be followed by a famine so severe that everyone would even forget about those 7 good years. And so that was the end of the interpretation from Joseph's perspective. Everyone in the room that day figured that Joseph would be then escorted out of the room and taken all the way back to prison. But then Joseph does the unthinkable, and he gives the king unsolicited advice, which is really dangerous to do to a king, especially if you're a foreigner who still smells like jail. He said someone needs to wake up every day thinking about how to deal with this crisis. They need to be put in charge of grain storage. There was silence in the throne room as everyone waited for the king to put this foreigner in his place and to think up some unimaginable horror and torture to execute on this arrogant foreign prisoner. But the king responds, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" A twist in the story, something no one could have seen coming. The king decides to put Joseph in charge of this grain storage program. It would be Joseph's job to wake up every day focused on storing as much grain as possible and managing it once the famine arrived. He said, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Who could have thought that this would happen? In Joseph's wildest dreams, the story takes on a twist and a turn of the unexpected. How many times in your life has something happened that you didn't expect? Joseph's ability to make decisions well was evident to the king. That skill was used as a slave and as a prisoner, and now it would be used in the palace. Many of you know the rest of the story. Everything happened like Joseph said. Grain was stored, famine came, and Joseph is now selling grain to the nations of the world, keeping everyone alive, including his own family. While Joseph is out doing his new job, he sees his 9 brothers, those older brothers who sold him into slavery, who hated him and wanted and were willing to kill him. They've come to Egypt to buy bread and keep their family alive. They don't recognize Joseph. He's 30 years old. He is the prime minister of Egypt. He was only 17 the last time they saw him, beat, bloody, scared, sold into slavery. They thought that decision was gone and would never come back to haunt them. But now Joseph reveals himself to them, and they are terrified because they know what they would do to him if they were in his position. They beg for mercy that they know they don't deserve. But Joseph, you see, is nothing like his older brothers. He decided against the gravitational pull of bitterness. He didn't allow the circumstances of his life, the injustice, the hurt, the betrayal that made him a slave and a prisoner, made him live as a foreigner. He didn't react. He chose wisely. He made good decisions over and over again. He saw the big picture. No one would have blamed him if he had been angry or bitter or felt like he was due a little self-indulgent behavior after all. Had he made decisions that soothed his pain for the moment, it would be understandable. A little self-medicating, lashing out, make others feel the hurt he was feeling. But he would not allow his circumstances to make him a slave or a prisoner. He was free to choose his story. He chose the ultimate over the immediate. He chose for the big picture and not the moment. He knew how he wanted his story to end. And you see, that's why we are telling his story. That's why his story is worth telling. Thousands of years later, it's been told millions of times all over the world. So how about you? Someone may have taken control of your story. Someone selfish and violent. Maybe it's not your fault, at least not all of it. This chapter you're in, how will it end? When it becomes part of your story, will you be proud of it? Or will you lie about it and hide it? There's grace and mercy for your bad decisions, the people you've hurt, and the pain you caused. You can be forgiven because God sent Jesus to pay the price for those decisions. Ask God to forgive you and have mercy on you. Surrender your life and the control of your story to Him, to Jesus, and begin again, fresh and new from where you are. What story do you want to tell? You and I only get this one story. Maybe you've not chosen well so far, or at least not in this chapter. But I have good news for you. Your story isn't over yet. It's not finished yet. It can still be a good story. If you make a decision that from now on, this is the legacy decision, I'll decide to create a story I'll be proud to tell. You're the author. You're the director. You're the captain of your ship. The way your story ends is up to you. So, what story do you want to tell? We'll pick it up right here next time for part 3 of Decide Better and Regret Less.